Just when you thought the fun couldn't end, bam, we get a new release from yet another great band. So let's board this big train to take us down to some great sound. Folklore by Big Train. So Folklore is the 9th studio album from the UK group Big Train. These guys started off in the early 90s and really started to get a little bit of momentum into the mid and late 90s. They were following that same kind of vein as Box Beard was to try to rejuvenate the progressive rock scene from the early 70s. But Big Train took a different approach. They decided to incorporate a much bigger sound, but with a more folky aspect to it, almost like a Renaissance or Jethro Tull style, while still kind of keeping that Genesis and Yes flavor to the whole thing. So I was actually really looking forward to this, especially when they were teasing us with that EP of Wassail, which actually ended up on this album. I really like the new approach. I like that humble sound that they had, even though it was so great and so large. So what do we find on their 9th studio album of Folklore? Well, we have a lot of the same from what we have heard in the past. Definitely we've got that big sound with a lot of different instruments. We have everything from fiddles to French horns to the flute that is usually present within the Big Train. So that big sound is definitely still rooted here. What I like about Folklore that wasn't really found on English Electric or even the Underfell Yard is a little bit of a darker sound as well. There seems to be much more use of that organ or Hammond, or just more of that atmospheric darkness that's found within it. There's definitely that title track of Folklore, which has that little bit of that darkness to it. And one of the main reasons why I love Big Train is just how they orchestrate all that noise to come into a synthesized whole. This is great, especially on Folklore, the title track, where they've got all of that sound. You've got the flutes, you've got the violins, you've got the keyboards, you've got everything coming together, and each one is given their spot to shine. A lot of times when you've got so much noise going on, it can be lost in the shuffle, so the mix of this album was very well handled. And I love the energy that these guys are bringing. It's hard to listen to Folklore and many of the tracks on this album without tapping along, without getting engaged with this band. And I think a lot of that is due to the drummer, of Nick DeVargelo. This guy presents drumming very well. My hat goes off to this guy. It harkens back almost to like a Phil Collins, where even though the music is more of a mellow, sweet, he's in there and he's providing such a great energy and such a great jam that it's really hard not to become engaged with a lot of the music here. And just the lead vocals of David Longdon here, it's just stellar. The way that he's belting out along these songs, I will say, they definitely took a little bit more of a mellow approach here. There's a lot more somber and a lot more subdued songs on this. London Plains and Along the Ridgeway, the second and third song on this album, are definitely much more of a subdued and mellow, which does allow for a lot of those subtle moments to shine. It provides that atmosphere to take place. And I love how Along the Ridgeway blends really well into Salisbury Giant. Salisbury Giant is a really fun track, with that root of the song being that upright classic bass. It provides really great root for the album, and that wandering around on the keyboards is a really fun track. Just their use of incorporating all different kinds of sounds and all different kinds of music. So it's like, you know, they had a really great party and they invited everybody over, and whatever instrument they brought was what they included on this album. And so that's really kind of that spirit there, and I really enjoyed that. The Transit of Venus Across the Sun is actually a really interesting song, and I really enjoy this. I really get into the groove of it. It starts off with a lot of the French horns, and it almost reminds me of like a Christmas carol. I almost expect, you know, Ebenezer Scrooge to come around the corner and, you know, yell out "Bah humbug" before he gets visited by these three ghosts. Maybe that's the point, because, you know, the overall concept of the album is that folklore, stories being passed down from generation to generation. But I love how this song evolves, and I love how it just develops. It's starts off being very somber and very quiet and has a slow build towards the end. And I like how they don't rush it. I love how they take their time and let the music develop on its own. It's almost just like a good garden where you don't rush anything through. And one of the things that I love about this album and this band is that they'll bring a concept to play, and at first it won't quite fit, it won't quite jive, but the more they repeat it and the more they use it, the surrounding area around it will actually configure to it. It's a weird kind of a build-up, because it's not like building towards this big explosion of sound, it's more of just everything coming together and all the gears coming towards it.
So many words left unsaid, so many deeds left undone, the transit of Venus across the sun. So many words left unsaid, so many deeds left undone, so many tales without an end, the transit of Venus across the sun.
Now the seventh song of Winky is actually a really interesting one. It has a lot more of a heavy moments at times, and that's definitely a little bit of a fresh air, but it's that heavy hitting song of Brooklands that really hits home. This is what I love, and this is where that drumming comes through. There's that little bit of a jam session in this part that's really, really fun. And much like that transit of Venus across the sun, it has that moment where things aren't quite lining up quite right, but then all of a sudden there's a slow shift and it all makes sense. And Telling of a Bees is a really nice kind of a way to end the album, being the last song. It's a much more mellow track, and it doesn't have that darkness that a lot of these tracks have. It's a breath of fresh air, almost like a reflection on the album as a whole, where you're reflecting about it and you're enjoying the ride. Overall, it's a great listen from start to finish, and there's no real low point on this album either. The only criticism I will have is, unlike the Underfell Yard or unlike English Electrics Part 1 and 2, there really wasn't any moment on this album that really spoke to me on a hitting home level. There's no real oomph on this album as I did find on Big Big Train's past albums. Kind of equating it to baseball, there was no real home run on this album, but there was a lot of times where, you know, you got the people around the bases a lot of times, and it is a win overall. So really, it's for that reason I have to say you still have to pick this up in physical form if you can find it. It is a great album, and because of the structure and because each song adds something new to the album and there's no real low point, it's still a highly recommended album and a great addition to the Big Big Train discography. So that's about it. What did you guys think about Folklore by Big Big Train? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting below. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.
There is hope where chance was slim, but thank God 15 minutes in.